It doesn't let up. International politics are on steroids like we've never seen before. In recent weeks, we have heard Trump talk about the annexation of Greenland, recovering the Panama Canal, the trade war with Mexico and Canada, and now it's his turn to talk about Gaza.
Trump proposes U.S. takeover of Gaza and says all Palestinians should leave.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing.
At the press appearance following his meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Donald Trump once again blew up the political agenda with an explosive statement, announcing that he intends for the United States to use its military power to take control of Gaza and permanently displace the 2 million Palestinians who call this territory home, and who, according to the US president, should now be forcibly relocated to other Arab countries, such as Jordan, Egypt, and possibly also Syria.
I don't think people should go back to Gaza. I heard that Gaza has been very unlucky for them. They live like hell. They live like they are living in hell. Gaza is not a place for people to live, and the only reason they want to go back, and I strongly believe it, is because they have no alternative.
According to the president, this would allow the United States to, and I quote literally, rebuild Gaza and turn it into a mecca for employment and tourism. That is to say, in a single appearance, Trump has torpedoed the idea of two states and any political approach that has been made so far with respect to this territory. This is a radical shift in the US position, including the stance of Trump himself, who came into office in 2016, promising to get America out of foreign brawls like Iraq and Afghanistan, which of course is a far cry from any idea of invading, occupying, and evicting the Gaza Strip. Not even Israel ever intended to go that far, and it's certainly not clear that the US president has that legal standing. Not to say that the forced removal plan flagrantly violates international law and has no backing from anyone. Jordan and Egypt have already said no way, and messages of rejection are appearing all over the world.
Arab nations reject Trump's suggestion to clean out Gaza.
But okay, I know, it's true. We're probably facing a new move in what we may already call Trump dynamite, a variant of the madman strategy that consists of blowing up negotiations by adopting radical positions in order to force the other party to give in. With this announcement, Trump seems to want once again to raise the tension to its highest level, just at a time when he wants to start working on the second phase of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And the truth, Netanyahu's own jokingly smiling face seems to confirm this idea. In fact, last Saturday, 1st of February, President Trump spoke on the phone with President El-Sisi of Egypt. And what did they talk about? Well, specifically, how to secure the ceasefire agreement and negotiations. What they didn't talk about was the idea of sending hundreds and thousands of Palestinians to Egypt. That's not what was talked about, because honestly, this possibility is most likely not even in the real plans of either the United States nor Israel. Now, words are never neutral, and this way of exploiting Trump's political newsworthiness may have consequences. First of all, does the old fable of the boy who cried wolf ring a bell? That is, the story of a shepherd boy who, for fun, repeatedly fooled the people of his village by alerting them to danger, claiming that the wolf was coming. The problem is that when the day comes when the wolf really does appear, and the shepherd gave the alert again, nobody believed him, and the wolf devoured the sheep. Well, something similar is happening here. The strategy of the madman, or in this case, the Trump dynamite, can be used a couple of times, but no more. There comes a time when no one will take the White House position seriously. In a way, it's what happened with Trudeau, who stood up to Trump and beat him to the punch with the tariff war. But that's already history. It was just over 24 hours ago, which in the Trump calendar is just short of prehistory.
Our people in Gaza will not allow these plans to be carried out. What is needed is an end to the occupation and aggression against our people, not expelling them from their land.
But this is not the only problem that Donald Trump's stance and this peculiar way of doing politics may entail. In this video, we'll look at what consequences this latest announcement of wanting to annex the Gaza Strip could have, whether or not it's possible, and also why the idea at its core, or at least conceptually, is not so far-fetched. Let's get on with it. In recent weeks, Trump has made a lot of threats. He's threatened Denmark, Panama, Colombia, Canada, Mexico, and even Spain. Now it's Jordan and Egypt's turn.
They say they're not going to accept. I say they will.
In this case, it refers to the idea of accepting 2 million Palestinians who would come to live in its territory.
I'd like Egypt to take people. You're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out that whole thing. You know, it's over.
Of course, this would not be so straightforward. Israel previously occupied this territory for almost 40 years, between 1967, when it seized it from Egypt during the so-called Six-Day War, and 2005, when then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon decided to evict the Jewish settlers and withdraw completely from this territory. Why did Israel do so? Well, because the occupation turned into a real trial, with constant attacks and protests. This is precisely why Trump is talking about the possibility of evicting the 2 million people living in Gaza in the initial phase of this sort of solution. Of course, it could end up being a major cleansing operation, one of the largest demographic cleansing operations in all history. But of course, if Trump says this, it's because he considers that any other form of occupation would be impossible. Be that as it may, there is something, or rather, there are two things Trump is right about: the difficult situation in Gaza today and the enormous potential of this territory. On the one hand, the Strip is completely destroyed after more than a year of intense Israeli military operations. We're talking about rubble everywhere, more than 50 million tons of debris, thousands and thousands of buildings that could collapse at any moment, the total destruction of much of the electricity and water infrastructure, and tens of thousands of unexploded ordnance that pose an immense danger.
If you had damage that was 1/100th of what I saw in Gaza, no one would be allowed to return to their homes. That's how dangerous it is. There are 30,000 unexploded ordnance. There are buildings that could collapse at any moment. There are no utilities there at all. No working water, no electricity, no gas, nothing.
I don't know how they could want to stay. It's a demolition site. It's a pure demolition site. If we could find the right piece of land or numerous pieces of land and build them some really nice places with plenty of money in the area, that's for sure. I think that would be a lot better than going back to Gaza, which has had just decades and decades of death.
Rebuilding Gaza is going to be a very complicated mission that's going to cost a lot of money. The situation today is incredibly bad. For example, according to UN estimates, clearing all the rubble alone could take years and more than $1.2 billion. In other words, that basically much of Gaza has become a kind of rug. And since you have to start practically from scratch, the president's idea would be to put a lot of money into building new neighborhoods and cities, to put the Palestinians from Gaza in Jordan and Egypt in exchange for them ceding the Gaza Strip. In Trump's eyes, that course of action would solve the problem of all the conflict with Israel once and for all. Of course, as we'll see, it's not that simple. Starting with the amount of money and time it would cost to carry out these plans, it would be an enormous logistical challenge, and ending with the necessity of having to have a large deployment of troops that could result in a bloodbath. Do you remember the experience of Iraq? Well, something like that. People generally don't like to be forcibly removed from their homes, much less to be put in a desert.
This is literally the most incomprehensible policy proposal I have ever heard from an American president. It would make the $40 billion foreign assistance budget that Trump and Elon Musk consider a waste look like a rounding error.
But VisualPolitik community, as well as the disastrous state Gaza is in today, there is something else Trump is right about, and that is in the enormous potential that Gaza has. I know this is something that many of you may find very strange, bizarre, a savage idea, but probably in the 60s and 70s during the Vietnam War, you would also have considered that seeing images like these in Hanoi would be impossible, or it would even seem impossible for you to think that this has become this. And why am I telling you this? Because Gaza is a territory with good weather, embedded in the Mediterranean, with a long coastline and many beaches. In other words, a great place to create a modern city focused on tourism. And they could even exploit some small gas fields that have been found off their coasts. Fields such as Gaza Marine, which was being developed by Chevron until Israel shut down the project. It's a small field, but would generate foreign exchange. In Trump's eyes, Gaza could be what Lebanon used to be, something like the Las Vegas or Miami of the Middle East. And keep in mind, this is what Ivanka Trump's husband said just 1 year ago.
Jared Kushner says Gaza's waterfront property could be very valuable. Donald Trump's son-in-law also says Israel should bulldoze an area of the Negev desert and move Palestinians there.
Envision a world, people living there, the world's people. I think you'll make that into an international, unbelievable place. I think the potential in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. And I think the entire world, representatives from all over the world will be there. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
But of course, for this to be possible, several things would be necessary. First, Israel will have to accept that a tax haven would be set up right next to its borders, and that money would be put into this region instead of going into Israel itself. Second, you would need labor. A lot of low-cost labor. Where is it going to come from? You would have to repopulate Gaza with people from other places. Maybe Egypt, Jordan, Bangladesh, which if you think about it, besides taking a long time, would be a bit weird. It would also mean reproducing many of the difficult images that we saw years ago in the Middle East with cheap labor. Third, you would have to make it a very safe place, accepted by the international community, and with a good reputation, which seems unrealistic. This place would probably end up becoming a dodgy place where unscrupulous people try to make money, while the people have been condemned to live in the desert. And that's not to mention the fanaticism. Any attack would ruin the chances of development for a long time, and this place would certainly be an influential target for international terrorism. Fourth, it would cost an enormous amount of money, with a huge opportunity cost. Where would that money come from? It's not clear. Fifth, what sense would it make for the United States to spend millions of dollars on an empty territory that would also compete directly with the tourist and commercial developments of allied countries such as Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia? Why not spend that money at home? What benefit would it be to the federal government to spend millions of dollars on the occupation so that in the end, the benefit would go elsewhere? Fifth, it would mean answering a delicate question. Whose sovereignty would this territory belong to? And sixth, the problem in Gaza lies not in the territory, but in the people, and that wouldn't go away. The truth, it doesn't seem like a very realistic plan. In any case, this does leave us with some good news. If Hamas could be removed and things normalized in Gaza, then investment from Arab countries could come in, and Gaza could become a relatively prosperous place. It could become a vacation spot for people from Jordan and Egypt. It could take advantage of its small gas reserves and become a perfect place for trade. In other words, without Hamas, there is hope. In any case, one thing is clear. Something must be done about Gaza, a territory that has basically become a base of operations for a host of terrorist groups, starting of course with Hamas. The problem is that Israel has been very clear. It will not tolerate the return of Hamas to power, which leads to a kind of vicious circle. In this context, a development plan for Gaza is absolutely necessary, and if a solution to the conflict is really to be found, a radical change in Palestinian society must be encouraged. Trump is right in this. The point is that it's not a simple matter, and the idea that the White House has conveyed does not seem realistic. Now, is Trump's idea feasible? Hardly. Finding a residential solution for the Palestinians would take years. Fanaticism would likely become radicalized. Tension in the West Bank would multiply. Forced relocation of Palestinians could severely destabilize Egypt and Jordan, and the result, overall, could be a more unstable world. These would be the unintended consequences of carrying out this plan. But let's look at it in more detail.
Talk does not come for free.
What we've just told you may seem like one more of the many wisecracks that Trump has released in recent weeks, and let me say, it surely is that. The problem is that this kind of thing doesn't come for free, it has consequences. Just as with the threats of tariffs left and right, Trump is playing with fire by saying he wants to occupy Gaza and expel its 2 million inhabitants. Why? To begin with, an expulsion of population en masse would violate international law and human rights, and would provoke a very strong global condemnation, starting with the Arab countries themselves. In fact, with these statements, Donald Trump has already jeopardized the entire stability in the Middle East and the normalization of relations between Israel and the Arab powers. Do you want an example? Then pay attention to the communique from Saudi Arabia, one of the countries with which Israel could soon normalize relations.
His Royal Highness emphasized that Saudi Arabia will continue its relentless efforts to establish an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and will not establish diplomatic relations with Israel without that.
Saudi Arabia released this statement on the 5th of February, after learning of Trump's new intentions for Gaza. And as in Riyadh, in many other Arab countries, including some with good relations with Israel, communiques along the same lines have been signed.
A broad group of Arab nations on Saturday rejected an idea floated by President Trump for Gazans to be moved to Egypt and Jordan, saying in a joint statement that such a plan risked further expanding the conflict in the Middle East.
Now, what exactly does this all mean? Well, basically, what Netanyahu has received as a fantastic statement from his best buddy in the White House could actually be very bad news for Israel. Let's just say that a conflict that already seems to be on the verge of being finalized may flare up again. I'm talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict. Visual politic community, the Abraham Accords, which allowed Israel to establish diplomatic relations with several Arab countries, were supported by Donald Trump himself during his first term. It was one of his great political successes. However, now the president seems willing to blow up his own agreements, just as he wanted to do with the trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, for example, which he himself had renegotiated and renewed with AMLO and Trudeau in 2019. But that's not even all. If Trump were to carry out such madness, occupy Gaza, and forcibly displace its entire population, this would be the perfect breeding ground for the resurgence of terrorism. Now that the terrorist groups that threaten Israel, such as Hamas and Hezbollah, are weakened, such an action could drive many Palestinians into the arms of the more radical groups. Many Palestinians and many Muslims are outraged by this mopping up operation. In a way, Trump would be legitimizing an armed struggle, no longer just against Israel's existence, but for its very existence as a people. This is certainly how it would be seen in many Muslim environments, and I can assure you that this would not be good for the United States, but it would be much worse for Israel, and especially for the Jewish settlements in the West Bank, which could be involved in a new intifada. But there's more. This idea of the law of the strongest could create a very dangerous precedent. Justifying a unilateral intervention to occupy Gaza and expel its entire population would justify other conflicts in the eyes of dictators such as Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. I'm referring, for instance, to Ukraine and Taiwan. What moral authority could the United States have, from now on, to condemn foreign invasions against other weaker territories if they do the exact same thing? In Ukraine, we've seen everything. Kidnapping of Ukrainian children, forcibly deported to Russia and handed over to Russian families. We've seen entire regions forcibly displaced due to Russian occupation, and we've seen how Putin is trying to erase all traces of Ukrainian identity in the occupied territories. Would all that be so different from Trump's new plan for Gaza? Well, honestly, I don't think so. And in the case of Taiwan, it's a very similar story. As you know, one of the historical claims of China and the Chinese Communist Party is the annexation of Taiwan. An annexation that, yes, in theory, they would like to be peaceful, but lately Beijing no longer rules out the use of force as categorically as before.
China won't renounce use of force over Taiwan. Xi visits Frontline Island.
If we were to see images like those that would be produced if Trump's idea were to be carried out, many dictators around the planet would begin fantasizing about their own aspirations, and that would be a big problem. And yes, I've already told you that these kinds of plans emerge without the real intention of carrying them out, but rather as a source of pressure to achieve a much more advantageous end to the war for Israel. But the problem is that what Trump doesn't understand is that it's not even necessary to act. Just proposing things like this is enough to generate enormous polarization and tension internationally. This is not a real estate operation in Lower Manhattan. Here, we're talking about the risk of creating much more global instability. Basically, the law of the strongest, bully diplomacy, turning international politics into the Wild West. A Wild West without sheriffs in charge. And this is where we come to the last great dilemma. The last great problem that a country like the United States, which is not just any country, has with this type of behavior. The politics of wisecracks and anything goes. This is where Trump could become a real problem. Visual politic community, we may be looking at a new move in the use of Trump dynamite, both to force second phase negotiations with Hamas, but also to strike a blow of force in the region. What am I referring to? Well, you see, the arrival of Donald Trump to power has had one consequence in international politics that has gone unnoticed, and that is that Iran could be accelerating its plans to the maximum. US intelligence believes that a secret team of Iranian scientists is working flat out to get its growing stockpile of nuclear fuel into a viable weapon as quickly as possible. Why? Well, because in Tehran, the Ayatollahs seem convinced that having a nuclear weapon is their best life insurance. The events of the last few months, the defeats of Hamas and Hezbollah, along with the fall of the al-Assad regime in Syria, may have been a point of no return. Many Iranian regime leaders are now convinced that it's absolutely imperative to have a nuclear weapon to strengthen their deterrence capability. And what does this have to do with the Trump and Gaza announcement? Well, talks are probably going on right now, and this could add fuel to the fire. It's it's the dynamite strategy. What might this also contribute to accelerating Iran's plans? Might it, as we have seen, embolden other powers to do the same? Could it fuel a new dawn for international fanaticism and terrorism? Well, yes, but the Trump dynamite strategy requires precisely that, playing on the edge, with all that this entails. Is this way of doing things acceptable or not? Well, personally, I think that, at best, it is a case for feast today and hunger for tomorrow, and that's in the best case scenario. If history has shown us anything, is that the policies of the strongest bring no good. In a way, Trump is going back to a very 19th century vision based on territorial expansion, which, trust me, didn't bring anything good. Supposedly, if we've learned anything, it's that people come before territories. In any case, guess what? This new turn of events has completely erased the tariff war, that trade, financial, and political crisis that Trump unleashed just a few hours ago. In this, I think Trump is quite similar to Spanish leader Pedro Sanchez. He covers up one crisis with another bigger one. But of course, that's just my opinion. Now, we'd like to know yours. Tell us what you think about Trump's plan in the comments. Do you think it's feasible? Do you think it's a real possibility? Let us know what you think. And if you find this video interesting, don't forget to like it and subscribe to Visual Politic if you haven't already done so. All the best. I'll see you next time.